Pre-COVID-19, Germany was the ninth most visited country in the world. People travel to Germany for its rich culture, wide array of food options, interesting combination of old world charm and modern urban cities, and of course, great beer. Making the move to Germany, however, is often for very different reasons. But interestingly, globally, it's the second most popular country to move to for expats after the US. Today on the Canadian Expat, we're speaking with Jenna, a Canadian who has been living in Germany since 2014. She is also a YouTube creator, publishing amazing content all about her experience as an expat in Germany, with lots of tips and suggestions to successfully live in the country. Thus the title of her YouTube channel, Life in Germany.
Like many of you, I myself had a very difficult path relocating to Germany, and I've decided to take those experiences that I've been through so that I can share them with you so that you don't make the same mistake as I did.
If you have any interest in moving to Germany, and I mean any interest in moving to Germany, you need to check her channel out. Links are in the description. Jenna, welcome to the Canadian Expat.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited. This is the first time that anybody's actually recording me for a change. I'm usually on the other end, so very excited.
Well, we're very excited to speak with you. Now, you've been in Germany for almost 7 years now, clearly well qualified to speak about life in the country. But just to give us some context, can you introduce yourself, where you came from in Canada, and what led you to Germany in the first place?
Absolutely. So I first moved to Germany, 7 years ago, as you mentioned, and I had absolutely zero intention of moving to Germany. I have to be honest, I was very content with my life in Toronto. I come from a smaller town. For those people located in the GTA, they'll know where Oakville is. So I'm from Oakville, Ontario, and I was happy, everything was going well. And I was traveling a bunch, and I went to South Africa, just so happened to meet a man there who is now my husband, who is also German. And he finally decided to push me over on over here to Germany. As much as I tried to convince him to move over to Canada, it just wasn't in the cards. So I gave it a shot. I wasn't sure how it was going to happen or how it was going to roll, but at the end of the day, I ended up falling in love with the country, and I've been here ever since.
Now, just to get us in the whole atmosphere of this video, right, and understand where you're at right now, when you step out your front door, and we love to ask this question, when you step out your front door, what do you see?
Oh, that's a good question. I should be able to turn my webcam around right now and show you, but it's dark. I would definitely, maybe I could move my camera over and show you. I live very, very close to other apartments, which for me is something that I was definitely not used to as a Canadian. We have, for the most part, unless you live in a bigger city, quite a lot of space between your neighbors. You also usually have a big garden. So for me, what I see is just a ton of other apartment buildings. And I love it. I hate it too. Sometimes it's a mix of both, but I will be moving to a smaller suburb in Düsseldorf, Germany, where I am right now, which also tends to have horses along the road and is quite close to the Rhine River. So there's a big contrast there between where we're living now in the city and then a little bit more outskirts.
When we move to another country, or before we move to another country, we often have an idea of what life in that country will be like. And I'm curious about what a day in the life of Jenna looks like.
Well, my life changed, I'd say, pretty drastically between living in the GTA in Canada versus living here in Düsseldorf, Germany. And that was mainly because back in Canada, I was working, the full-time job in marketing in the city, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. For all of the other people living in the GTA, you'll know, traffic is insane. Like, it is absolutely insane. So I spent pretty much my full day either working or driving in traffic. And so here it's significantly different. Of course, that's because I also work for myself now. And this is something I've been able to figure out in Germany and learn a lot from. But it's also because even as a freelancer, somehow people here in Germany always find the time in the mornings and in the afternoons to see friends or spend time with families. It's not all about driving in traffic, going to work, watching Netflix while eating dinner, and then going to bed, which was quite often the case for me back in the GTA, in the city. So a day in the life here would be, I work from home, which is great. I definitely love it. I know many other people are at the moment as well. But I have a lot more time after work, just to go to the park, or, grab a beer with friends, or go out for dinner or whatnot, which is something in Canada we used to pretty much only save for like a Friday or Saturday. So I'd say there's definitely been a lot of positives, positive changes for me.
Now, in your videos, you often mention about the sort of some of the difficulties that people may find in their move to Germany. Can you give us some examples of some of the difficulties that people do encounter in their move?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's always going to be difficulties regardless of what country you're moving to. That's a given. However, I would say that I found Germany, I've traveled to about 50 countries now. And of course, I haven't really integrated in the same way that I have in Germany. But I have to say, the language barrier is probably one of the hardest things when it comes to actually integrating, because there's some countries that really kind of open up and offer, English paperwork and whatnot. But here in Germany, a lot of the time everything pretty much is run in German. I mean, people speak English, but the paperwork and the bureaucracy a lot of the time is run in German. And for most expats, for most internationals, we tend to kind of like fall into this downward spiral of confusion. And that's because when you get started, there's not really a very clear path as to what you have to do and when. And so, for example, when you first move here, you want to rent an apartment, but you can't rent an apartment unless you have this IBAN number, or the bank account number of an EU bank. And if you're coming from somewhere like North America, well, you can't get that EU bank without an address here in Germany. And you can't register in the city if you don't have an address, but you also can't get your tax number to work if you haven't registered in the city. So it's kind of like this spider web of trying to figure it all out. And for me, it happened to me. It happens to absolutely everybody. And that's really kind of what inspired me to not only open up this Life in Germany channel, but I also built my own welcome program for expats from all over the world to be able to properly integrate and settle in here in Germany, while also being able to save money and avoid making the same awful mistakes that I did.
So I guess in that same kind of vein of thought, what would you say would be your top 4 tips for successfully moving to Germany?
Well, number one, and this might seem a little cliche, is obviously make sure that you're prepared. And I say this because it's not every country. I really don't think in absolutely every country you need to go and be fully prepared. But Germany is definitely one of those places that you should make sure that you're well prepared, because I find Germans are usually always very, punctual, well prepared, on time, and their expectations of you are usually very similar. So I would say make sure that you're well prepared, not just with the logistical aspects, but also mentally. So understanding, what changes you're going to go through, and understanding that you're going to at some point go through these stages, I like to call it, of expat grief, where, you get excited and then you get overwhelmed and then you're not sure if it's for you. And you think about moving back, but then you become a proud citizen of this country or whatnot. And it kind of like, it's a whirlwind of emotions that you go through. But if you're well prepared and you do this all beforehand, things can can be a lot easier. So other tips I would give would definitely be learn a language a little bit beforehand. And I'm not saying, like master the whole language, but I find that even in larger cities in Germany that speak a lot of English, you tend to get a little bit more of a positive response, or it's a little bit more appreciated if you do know, a few words like "Hallo, wie geht's dir?" Or explain something like, or ask simple questions basically at the grocery store, which is usually where you're going to have the biggest battle. And other than that, I would say come curious to Germany and with an open mind, and try not to judge too much. And I say that because We expats here in Germany are quite famous for coming and then complaining about the German culture. And I mean, living here in Germany is absolutely phenomenal. But of course, you've got culture shocks. You have big culture shocks here. And people do tend to complain, the taxes are so high in Germany, or why are people so rude, or no one's holding the door open for me, whatnot. And there's things that you just kind of have to open up and accept and understand and appreciate, and then understand why they are that way, and then grow to actually love these things. I actually now really love that Germans are quite honest, and that you can ask a question and you'll get an actual response back, a legitimate and truthful response back. And fourth, my fourth point would definitely be just push yourself beyond your limits, because a lot of people tend to move to Germany and then they enter this little bubble. We call it the expat bubble a lot here in Germany. And it's basically like a bubble where you get stuck knowing the same people, the same friends, and everybody speaks English. You're usually from the same job or the same workforce, and you never exit that bubble. So you never really get to experience Germany for all it's worth, and all of the amazing things and the amazing people here in Germany when you're stuck in that bubble. So as hard as it is when you're getting started, I would say keep on pushing. And even though you're scared, just do it. This is something that took me way too long.
That's all fantastic advice. I mean, I think it would be relevant to anyone, regardless of which country you're moving to, for the most part, right? And that the whole idea of culture shock and getting over culture shock is something that we've dealt with in video in the past as well. It can be a real thing, and getting into that rut of complaining with other expats is easy to do, and it's somewhat comforting in some ways to find others who are struggling in the similar ways. But it's so important, I think, to get out of that, right? And not complain about it. Get on with your life, meet new people, and you'll find that your life improves pretty dramatically, I think, after that.
Exactly. I mean, you've come to a new country for a reason, right? So even if it's not your permanent home, that's okay too. But embrace it as much as you can, because I think that's when you really get to fall in love with the country.
Yeah. From a Canadian perspective, moving there as a Canadian, do you find, or have you found, that it's any easier for you because you're a Canadian, or perhaps even more difficult because you're Canadian?
Oh, yes and no. And I have to say, yes, because a lot of Germans love Canadians. So when somebody says, "Oh, where are you from?" and you say, "Oh, I'm Canadian," they're like, "No way! Have you been to the Yukon, or have you been to Whitehorse?" It's just ingrained in their mindset here that Canada is this amazing, beautiful, gorgeous landscape. And I mean, granted, it absolutely is, but I turn on the TV every day here and I see all of these documentaries about Canada, and it makes me want to go back home. So yes, it's easy. People really, really tend to love Canadians and really love making conversation with Canadians. I also find that as an English speaker, it tends to be a little bit easier because it's still within that Germanic language. So it's a little bit easier to learn the language than, I don't know, somebody who grew up speaking Japanese, for example. But then I say no, because Canadians tend to be really friendly. And I oftentimes have found that some people will straight up say, "I feel like you're super fake right now." And it's because I'm constantly laughing and I'm constantly smiling. And until you really get to know me, my culture, my family, you don't realize until then that, we're generally a very happy, outgoing, bubbly family, and not just a family, but we do that in Canada. That's natural. And for some people in Germany, it's just too much. They just want you to like dial it down 10 notches and be real. And for me, this is real. This is who I am. But I guess some people don't see it that way. So yes and no.
Now, I want to jump back a little bit. You had mentioned something about the language, and I'm just curious a little bit more, if you could elaborate just a little bit more on the necessity to learn German for somebody who wants to move to Germany.
The easy answer is that in the bigger cities, you don't have to learn the language. And that's the good thing. If you just want to come here for a year and you want to stay in that little expat bubble and just do you, then it's okay as well. Especially in Berlin, you can really get by with just English. However, if you really want to integrate yourself and get to know the country and get to know the culture and the people, then you have to learn the language, even just a little bit. And it can be fun. It doesn't have to be all by the books. And there's so many apps nowadays and so many fun ways to really learn the language. And for me, I didn't even go to school to learn the language until a couple years later. And then even then, I've only taken a total of, I think, 3 months German classes, and I speak pretty fluently now. So it can be done, and I think that it should be done. So no, you don't have to learn the language, especially if you're living in a city. If you are living in a smaller town, I would say definitely, because there's not as many people that speak English. But some of the basics, like I mentioned, going to the grocery store or having to call your phone company or whatnot, this kind of stuff doesn't always happen in the English language, and the people don't always speak English. So it'll make life a lot easier if you know the
Right.
language a little bit.
Now, is there anything from Canada that you miss?
100%. Tons. I miss a lot. I mean, I miss obviously my friends and family
Sure.
dearly. I really miss the cottage culture. And I know this is more of an Ontario thing where we, spend the weekends up at our cottage. But I just miss having, this tiny little cottage on the water, because that's not something that they have in Germany. And actually being able to find property on the water is pretty much next to impossible. So I definitely miss that. But when we're talking about little items, there's some things I tend to find, like our prepackaged food in Canada, I miss a lot. So like, the Betty Crocker icing that you put on top of cakes, they use like a glaze here and they call that their icing. And so it's totally different. And so the little things are like Kraft dinner, I'd love that, or Kraft peanut butter. These tiny things are the things that I always crave. But at the end of the day, I just wish I could ship my whole family over to Germany and stay here. But at least I get to go home every once in a while and indulge more than you can imagine.
Sure. Jenna, thank you so much for joining with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm always happy to talk about my experiences here in Germany and my love for back home, or my longing for back home sometimes.
And thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. And it helps the channel a great deal if you hit that like button. Until next time.